It is June 28th, 2026, and at 2 o'clock in the morning local time, while most of the Gulf region was asleep, Iran launched what it called a decisive response. The IRGC's naval and aerospace forces fired ballistic missiles and drones simultaneously at two countries, targeting 8 U.S. military infrastructure positions across Kuwait and Bahrain. Ali Al Salam Air Base in Kuwait, which hosts U.S. Army helicopters. The U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters at Port Salman in Bahrain. 8 targets, 2 countries. One coordinated operation in the dead of night. Iran's state media was unambiguous about the result. 8 important infrastructures of the U.S. military, they said, had been destroyed. The IRGC called it a decisive response. Iran's commanders called it a crushing blow against American aggression. National television ran the announcement. The claim of 8 destroyed American military facilities spread across Iranian social media within minutes. Then the U.S. military released its assessment. 0 U.S. personnel harmed, 0 U.S. assets damaged, the projectiles aimed at Bahrain intercepted, the ballistic missiles fired at Kuwait detected, engaged and neutralized by Kuwaiti air defenses, the drones gone, the missiles gone, 8 announced targets, 0 confirmed hits on anything that mattered. And the U.S. military's official statement, issued within hours, did not even describe the attack as a significant event. It described it as something that had been handled. This analysis is built on confirmed reporting, official U.S. military statements, Kuwaiti government statements, Bahraini Interior Ministry releases, and publicly available information as of June 28, 2026. Everything cited here is verifiable. This is for educational and analytical purposes. Drop your country in the comments right now, because what happened in that 2-hour window between 2 and 3 in the morning tells you something about the state of this conflict that no single news headline is capturing. Drop your country below and stay with me through both parts of this. You will not get this picture anywhere else. Let us start from the beginning of the 72-hour sequence, because the missile attack does not make sense without the context that produced it. 10 days ago, Iran and the United States signed a 14-point memorandum of understanding, toll-free passage through the Strait of Hormuz, a 60-day framework to negotiate a final peace agreement, the naval blockade lifted, frozen assets released, both sides, on paper, agreeing to stop shooting at each other while diplomats worked. On June 25th, the IRGC attacked the Ever Lovely, a Singapore-flagged cargo ship carrying goods from Iraq following the Omani coastal route that the MOU specifically designated as the Safe Corridor. A one-way attack drone struck the ship's bridge. Iran's Parliamentary National Security Commission chairman called it, publicly and without embarrassment, ceasefire management rather than a violation, not an attack. Management. The United States struck Iranian missile and drone storage sites and coastal radar installations in response. CENTCOM's statement was precise. U.S. aircraft struck Iranian missile and drone storage locations and coastal radar sites after Iran hit the Ever Lovely. On June 27th, the IRGC struck again. The M/T Kiku, a Panama flag tanker carrying more than 2 million barrels of crude oil, was hit by another one-way attack drone at 4:30 in the morning as it transited near the strait. 2 million barrels of crude, the most sensitive category of commercial vessel in the waterway from both an economic and environmental standpoint, hit again. While the MOU was in force, the United States struck again. This time, CENTCOM's language was notably colder. Iran, they said, was given a chance to honor the ceasefire agreement, but elected not to. Then President Trump posted the existential warning on Truth Social. The Islamic Republic of Iran will no longer exist if military operations are forced to resume. And then between 2 and 3 in the morning on June 28th, Iran answered that warning by firing its biggest salvo at American bases since the ceasefire began. Ballistic missiles and drones. 8 declared targets. 2 countries, a coordinated joint naval and aerospace IRGC operation announced with the confidence of an institution that expected to produce results. What actually happened to those missiles and drones is the story. Let us walk through the technical picture country by country, because the details matter, and most coverage is not spending enough time on them. Kuwait first. Kuwait hosts Ali Al Salam Air Base, the primary U.S. Army helicopter facility in the country. The IRGC specifically named this base as a target and stated that helicopters stationed there had been targeted. Kuwait's Army General Staff Headquarters issued a statement on X within minutes of the attack beginning. The statement said Kuwaiti air defense systems were intercepting hostile missile and drone attacks. It advised residents that any explosions they heard were the result of air defense interceptions and urged the public to follow official safety instructions. The Kuwaiti military later confirmed it had detected and intercepted 2 ballistic missiles. No injuries reported, no damage to the base. The missiles that the IRGC had specifically fired at U.S. Army helicopters in Kuwait were taken out before they reached the target. Bahrain next. Bahrain hosts the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet, the command structure that oversees American naval operations across approximately 2.5 million square miles of water from the Suez Canal through the Persian Gulf to Pakistan. The Fifth Fleet headquarters has been a declared target of Iranian strikes repeatedly throughout this conflict. On the night of June 28th, the IRGC said it struck the Fifth Fleet headquarters at Port Salman. Iran's state media reported the headquarters had been hit. Bahrain's Interior Ministry activated air raid sirens. Citizens were instructed to move to the nearest safe location. And then CENTCOM released its assessment. The projectiles aimed at Bahrain were intercepted, no U.S. personnel harmed, no U.S. assets damaged at the Fifth Fleet headquarters. The Bahraini Interior Ministry later confirmed that the Iranian strikes had damaged a residential building near the international airport, an 8-story civilian residential building, top floor destroyed, windows blown out, rubble inside. The building was not near the Fifth Fleet headquarters. It was not a military target. It was where people lived. That is the full outcome of Iran's 8-target coordinated strike in a single sentence. 0 U.S. military assets damaged, 1 civilian residential building destroyed. The most powerful retaliatory operation Iran launched since the ceasefire began produced no military effect and destroyed a civilian apartment block. I want to stop here and address the framing that Iran's state media and some international outlets are applying to this outcome, because the framing itself is part of the story. Iran's state broadcaster IRGC announced 8 U.S. military infrastructures destroyed. Iran's IRGC, Public Relations Department, described the operation as a decisive response. Iranian social media treated the announcement as a military victory. Every single one of those claims is contradicted by the physical evidence. The Kuwaiti government confirmed interceptions. CENTCOM confirmed 0 damage to U.S. assets. The only physical evidence of anything reaching a target is the photograph Bahrain's Interior Ministry released of the damaged residential building, a civilian building hit by something that missed every declared military target. This pattern is not new to this conflict. It has repeated itself every time Iran has launched a retaliatory salvo at American bases in the Gulf during the last 4 months. The IRGC claims strikes on U.S. assets. CENTCOM says nothing was damaged. Outside governments, Kuwait, Bahrain, Jordan, Qatar, confirm interceptions and provide their own damage assessments. Iran's claimed military victories consistently fail to produce verifiable evidence of military damage. But here is why this latest iteration is more significant than previous rounds. The June 28th attack came after Trump's existential warning. It came after 2 consecutive nights of U.S. strikes. It came after the Kiku attack on a tanker carrying 2 million barrels of crude. It was framed by the IRGC as a decisive response, not a routine retaliation, not a warning shot, but a decisive answer to American aggression. And it produced 0 confirmed military effect while damaging a civilian apartment building. The gap between the IRGC's claimed capability and its demonstrated capability is not just a propaganda problem. It is a strategic problem. Because every time Iran announces a decisive strike and produces no verifiable military damage, it reveals to every audience watching, its own population, the Gulf states, the United States military, the international community, that its deterrence posture is operating on a foundation of claims that the physical outcomes cannot support. Now let me read something from the comment section of this channel, because one viewer put the question so precisely that it deserves a real answer before we go into part 2. The comment was this: Iran keeps firing and keeps claiming victories and keeps getting nothing done. At some point, they have to know this isn't working. So why do they keep doing it? That is the analytically important question, and the answer has 3 layers. The first layer is domestic. The IRGC's announcement of a decisive response, even one that produces no verified military effect, serves an audience inside Iran. A population that has watched its country absorb over 100 days of American and Israeli strikes, watched its military infrastructure degraded, watched its economy strangled by blockades and sanctions, needs to see its armed forces doing something. The announcement of 8 targeted U.S. facilities, regardless of the outcome, performs strength for a domestic audience that is not in a position to verify the claims independently. This is not cynicism. It is how military communication has worked in every conflict in recorded history. You tell your people you are winning, even when the physical evidence is ambiguous. The second layer is international. The Gulf states, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, are watching this conflict carefully and making calculations about their long-term relationship with Iran. Periodic demonstrations of Iran's willingness to strike at their territory, even if the strikes are intercepted, remind those governments that acquiescing to American and Israeli military operations from their soil carries a cost. The message Iran is sending to Kuwait by targeting Ali al-Salem base is not that it will destroy the base. It is that hosting American helicopters makes Kuwait a target. That message is received regardless of whether the missiles land. The third layer is operational. Missile salvos, even intercepted ones, consume air defense munitions. The Patriot missiles, the THAAD interceptors, The SAM-6 is fired by naval vessels. These systems expend real inventory with every interception. Iran is not just attacking targets, it is forcing the United States and its Gulf partners to burn through air defense stockpiles at a rate that has real logistical implications over a sustained campaign. This is a strategy that makes more sense over 6 months than over a single engagement. And it is a strategy that works better when the salvos are larger and more frequent. The June 28th attack involved ballistic missiles and one-way attack drones fired at Kuwait and Bahrain simultaneously. The Kuwaiti military confirmed 2 ballistic missiles detected and intercepted. Bahrain activated air raid sirens, and CENTCOM confirmed interceptions of projectiles aimed at the 5th Fleet. The residential building damaged in Bahrain was not near the 5th Fleet headquarters, which means one of 2 things. Either a missile or drone missed its declared military target by a significant margin and impacted a civilian building instead, or debris from an interception fell on the civilian building, a consequence that Kuwaiti officials specifically acknowledged as a possibility when they told residents that explosion sounds were from air defense systems engaging incoming projectiles. Either way, the military target, the 5th Fleet headquarters, was not struck, the declared target was not reached. The residential building that was damaged was hit by something that failed to reach its intended destination. Now let us talk about the air defense architecture that produced this outcome, because understanding how the interceptions work tells you why the 0 for 8 result is not an accident and not luck. Bahrain and Kuwait are covered by layered air defense. The outermost layer is naval. U.S. Navy destroyers operating in the Gulf are equipped with the Aegis combat system, which provides long-range radar tracking and can engage ballistic missiles at altitude using SM-3 and SM-6 interceptors before they approach terminal phase. The next layer is THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, which engages targets in the upper atmosphere during their descent phase. The inner layer is Patriot PAC-3, which provides point defense of specific installations. And below that, CRAM systems, counter-rocket, artillery and mortar, provide the final close-in defense layer. Iran's ballistic missiles, to reach a target at Ali al-Salem or the 5th Fleet headquarters, have to pass through every layer of that architecture. Not some of it, all of it. And the United States has been running this air defense architecture against Iranian salvos for 4 months. The crews have fired against real Iranian missiles in real combat conditions hundreds of times. Their intercept procedures are not theoretical. They are operationally refined. The accuracy problem this creates for Iran is compounding. Every failed salvo is not just a failed salvo. It is training data for the air defense systems. Every Iranian missile trajectory, every launch signature, every approach angle, all of it is collected, analyzed, and integrated into the targeting profiles that the interceptors use on the next salvo. Iran is not just losing missiles when its salvos fail. It is improving the accuracy of its opponent's defense systems while depleting its own offensive inventory. Let us talk about the residential building in Bahrain. Because this outcome, a civilian building struck while 0 military targets were hit, has strategic implications that go beyond the immediate damage. Bahrain's foreign ministry issued a statement describing Iran's actions as a dangerous escalation that reveals that what Tehran is doing is not a passing act nor an isolated incident, but rather a deliberate approach and a systematic pattern of repeated aggression. That language is significant. It is not the language of a government describing a military exchange between 2 distant powers. It is the language of a government whose sovereign territory was struck, whose citizens were endangered, and whose patience with the repeated targeting of its soil is running out. The Gulf Cooperation Council Secretary General called Iran's attack on Bahrain treacherous and said it would undermine ongoing peace efforts. The GCC represents Bahrain, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates. When the GCC Secretary General uses the word treacherous to describe an Iranian military action, that language carries the weight of 6 governments simultaneously signaling where they stand. Here is the strategic dynamic this creates, that the coverage is missing. Iran's retaliatory strikes are supposed to serve the purpose of deterring American military operations from Gulf state territory. The logic is straightforward. If Kuwait knows its soil and its citizens are at risk, every time the U.S. uses Ali al-Salem to launch strikes on Iran, Kuwait has an incentive to restrict American access to that base. If Bahrain faces missile attacks every time U.S. aircraft fly from its territory, Bahrain has an incentive to limit American operations. But the actual outcome of this strategy, 4 months into its execution, is the opposite of what that logic predicts. The Gulf states are not restricting American access to their bases. Kuwait is deploying its air defenses to intercept Iranian missiles. Bahrain is activating air raid sirens, and CENTCOM is announcing interceptions. The Gulf states are not distancing themselves from the American military presence. They are integrating their air defense operations with American systems to protect themselves from Iranian strikes. The strategy that was supposed to drive a wedge between America and its Gulf partners is producing tighter military integration between them. That outcome is not visible to the Iranian public, because Iranian state media does not report the interception rates or the GCC's response in terms that make the strategic failure legible. But it is visible to Iranian military planners who are watching their salvo after salvo produce zero confirmed damage to U.S. assets while consuming diminishing missile inventory and generating unified condemnation from every Arab government in the Gulf. Now let me give you the number I promised in part 1. The number that nobody in cable coverage is reporting, but that is the single most important data point for understanding what the June 28th attack actually means in strategic context. Before the conflict began on February 28th, the IRGC had an estimated baseline missile inventory representing its full pre-war capability across all categories: ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, one-way attack drones. Over the last 4 months, Iran has fired that inventory at targets across the region in hundreds of individual engagements. The naval blockade has limited its ability to import replacement components. The petrochemical facility at Mashhar that feeds missile propellant production was struck in June. The drone production lines were degraded during the conflict, though intelligence assessments indicate they have been partially restarted during the ceasefire period. The most recent intelligence estimates, based on the sourced reporting that came through in late May, put Iran's surviving missile inventory at approximately 70% of its pre-war baseline. Not because the strikes failed, the strikes degraded the inventory significantly, but because the ceasefire period gave Iran time to recover some of what it had lost, and because Chinese and Russian supply chain assistance partially circumvented the blockade's interdiction effect. 70%. That is what Iran had going into the June 28th attack. Every ballistic missile and drone fired at Kuwait and Bahrain last night was drawn from that inventory. Every intercepted projectile is an asset Iran cannot recover. The propellant is burned. The warhead is destroyed. The guidance system is gone. And the replacement parts that would allow Iran to rebuild those missiles faster are subject to a blockade that, while partially circumvented, has not been fully defeated. Iran is fighting a conflict in which every engagement it initiates that fails to produce military effect is a net loss. It expends irreplaceable inventory. It forces the opponent to expend replaceable air defense munitions, which is the one component of the attrition math that favors Iran's approach. But it gains nothing on the ground, damages no military assets, and produces the international condemnation of GCC states that it needs to keep neutral or sympathetic. The June 28th attack was not just a failure in a single night. It was a continuation of a pattern that is depleting Iran's strategic position engagement by engagement. Let us bring this back to what the entire picture looks like as of today, because the 72 hours from June 25th through June 28th contain everything you need to understand where this conflict is actually heading. Iran attacked the Ever-Lovely on the designated safe corridor and called it ceasefire management. The United States struck back. Iran attacked the Kiku, carrying 2 million barrels of crude, and was given a chance to honor the ceasefire and elected not to. The United States struck back again. Trump posted the most existential threat of this conflict. Iran responded with its most coordinated retaliatory salvo since the ceasefire began. 8 declared targets, 2 countries, ballistic missiles and drones in the dead of night. 0 U.S. military assets damaged, 0 U.S. personnel harmed, 1 civilian apartment building destroyed, every military target missed, and CENTCOM's official response described U.S. forces as remaining vigilant, lethal, and ready. Not alarmed, not responding to a significant strike, vigilant, lethal, and ready. The language of an institution that considers the attack something it handled rather than something it absorbed. That asymmetry? Iran announcing 8 destroyed U.S. facilities while CENTCOM describes the attack as something handled is the strategic picture in miniature. It is the picture that has been repeating itself throughout this conflict. Iran announces, America handles. The IRGC claims victory. The physical record shows interceptions, 0 military damage, and in the worst outcomes for the region, civilian buildings hit by missiles that missed their declared military targets. Here's what the next 48 hours will tell you that tonight cannot. If Iran stands down from commercial shipping attacks, if no new vessel is struck in the Strait of Hormuz in the next 48 hours, it signals that the IRGC's retaliation cycle has run its course, and the diplomatic track, however damaged, has a path to continuation. If Iran attacks another commercial vessel, if there is a 3rd ship struck on a designated safe corridor within 48 hours of tonight's missile salvo, it signals that the current IRGC posture is not a retaliatory response to American strikes, but an ongoing operational campaign to assert control of the waterway that will continue, regardless of what the MOU says, and regardless of what American retaliatory strikes cost. The difference between those two scenarios determines what Trump's warning means operationally. If Iran stands down, the warning was leverage, and the leverage worked. If Iran strikes again, the warning was a threshold, and the threshold is about to be crossed. Watch the AIS data for the Strait of Hormuz, watch the shipping traffic numbers, watch whether any vessel reports contact with Iranian forces in the next 48 hours, because the answer to whether the ceasefire survives this week is not going to come from a foreign ministry press release. It is going to come from what actually happens on the water. Iran fired its biggest salvo since the ceasefire was signed at 8 American military targets in 2 countries last night. The result was 0 military damage and a destroyed apartment building. That is not a decisive response. That is a demonstration of the gap between what Iran can announce and what Iran can deliver. And the American military, which described the attack as something it handled before resuming vigilant, lethal, and ready operations, appears to have drawn exactly that conclusion. What do you think Iran does in the next 48 hours? Does the IRGC stand down, or does the pattern continue? And if the pattern continues and Trump's threshold is crossed, what does completing the job actually look like, when the target list has been sitting on CENTCOM servers since February? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know what you think happens next. If this analysis is useful to you, subscribe. The next 48 hours in this story are not waiting for anyone's schedule. Stay sharp.